Greetings, lifelong learners. It is I, Hewlett, David Hewlett here with another audio awesome for you. This is where I read you my email of awesome awesomeness newsletter so you don't have to, because I know you're very busy people. I love listening to things while I'm walking the dog or driving to, it turns out, Cambridge or Kitchener this week. And so why wouldn't you? So settle back and enjoy. But before you do that, go visit techbandits.org. Sign yourself up for the email of awesome awesomeness. You do not want to miss out on all the links and the videos and all the fun stuff, the photos and pictures that I've done. You will not want to miss that. So go check that out, techbandits.org. And let's dive in. We've got a mutant monster of an email of awesome awesomeness this week, and I cannot wait to share with you. So let us start. Cast your minds, please, to the wonderfully brutalistic building that is the science block of the University of Toronto's Scarborough. It's literally like a study in brutalism. It is a fugly, beautiful building. I don't know why I like it so much, because it's very unfriendly and a bit grim looking. It's so much so that Guillermo del Toro used it in Shape of Water. In fact, 2 of my scenes were filmed in the science building of the University of Toronto Scarborough. So it has a place close to my home, as does, of course, Guillermo in the Shape of Water. But enough with these movie stars and Academy Awards and the Guillermo del Toros of it all. I was there this time talking puzzle learning, escape room learning, with the fabulous fourth-year biology students because of their amazing professor, this wonderful Professor Arthur Ashok. One of the other reasons I was there was for lunch. I'm a big eater. I like my food. And so but I got talked out of the pizza robot. So Andrew said that this was it's basically a jukebox for frozen pizzas. So I was very disappointed. So I said, like, what else they got? He's like, well, they've got a boba bot. And so I'm all about that. So it turned out that was equally unimpressive, because this boba bot, instead of making, one of the many choices it gave us of bubble teas, like it's supposed to, this boba tea thing, it made us the most terrible cup of bubbleless tea. It gave you all these wonderful options, these exotic options, and then it didn't have any of them, and this arm just sort of flailed around and made us this terrible tea. So I don't think we have to be worried about being entirely obsolete just yet, but it was rather fun to play with. But yeah, I don't think we're there yet. It was like an over-engineering problem. I feel like it definitely looked like it should work, and I think it probably did. But the sense I got was, if it's not 100%, it's useless when it comes to like a system that you need to have working all the time. So all it could do was make us this terrible tea. But once we were in class, the excitement began, because I get to witness these students different approaches to how they were going to solve this escape room problem. And Professor Ashok herself she's so intent on breaking students out of their familiar learning habits and processes and stuff. So she's totally up to all these new ways of teaching. And so very, very exciting and real sort of pleasure was the fact that she's now using my escape room learning ideas, and she's sort of just run with it. They're hers now. I mean, it's amazing. I was kind of surprised, though, that so many of these groups had settled on COVID as their topic, which I just thought they'd be bored sick of by now. But I guess maybe there's some tie-in with the education side, or what they're doing in their university class. And maybe it was a safe approach. And I think Professor Ashok was also a little bit like, they better be good, because a lot of them were quite similar. And some teams were really struggling. Like, you could tell they couldn't figure out how to bridge this sort of book learning with some kind of a play system, an escape play system for the kids. Other ones, oh my God, there was a lot of them on both sides, but there were some that were effortlessly coming up with these ideas. Like, they had no problems with the stories and how they were going to tie together. They got so enthusiastic and stuff. It was just great to see. What's weird about this stuff is that when I mention it to people who aren't in biology class in the fourth year of biology at University of Toronto, they start coming up with ideas all over the place. They don't know how to tie it to the biology, but they come up with all sorts of ideas. Whereas it's the opposite for these biology students. A lot of them, I feel like they're kind of penned in by what their own expectations of what they're supposed to be delivering, and how does this relate to the stuff that we're studying. And I think the pressure of I guess fourth year university stuff and maybe the classroom environment makes it hard for people to sort of express themselves more. But the thing I came away with, and became very apparent to me, was just how important it is not to be afraid of trying stuff, about making mistakes, because success is all about failing, right? There's a great quote by Bruce Lee that says, "In great attempts, it is glorious even to fail." And Bruce Lee did pretty well for himself. I worry perhaps that schools and parents, and being a parent myself, that we're not teaching kids how important it is to experiment and to allow themselves the chance to fail. And more importantly, once you fail, how do you respond to that failure? What's the right way of doing this? You get back up, you try something different, you learn something. It's like I said to the tech bandits, oh no, it worked. We didn't learn anything. You want things to, you want to get used to the idea that failure is part of the process. Without failure, you haven't pushed things enough in a lot of cases. But anyways, none of this stopped Professor Mason, myself, and Professor Ashok from having a wonderful time talking to the students about this stuff. And it's just watching, these young minds wrapping themselves around this stuff and coming up with stuff it's wonderful. So, and that was not enough though. All this experimental new approaches to learning and Professor Mason's lab adventures, that was not enough for me. I then had to go to Cambridge because I have a new networking and cybersecurity friend, or friends, I should say. This is James and his fabulous family and friends at MTX Technologies. There's no affiliation. They're just great fellow IT geeks and who were very, very kind and sort of showed me around and got me up and running. James and his networking guru, Cody, generously walked me through the setting up of this Dell PowerEdge server and configuring some VMware and an HP switch and all of this IT fun, thanks to James's keen eye when it came to these things being thrown out, these incredibly powerful, still very powerful server systems that a government group was throwing out. And so he said, "Is it okay for me to take?" They're like, "Yeah, sure." And so I've now got one of these beautiful giant things in my in the garage running away, and I got to figure out what to do with it. It's just going to be amazing. It was an awesome visit. I had the best time. They took us out for lunch, and there were donuts, and it's always about food with me, isn't it? I spent many happy hours soaking up as much as I could about the fascinating world of networking and cybersecurity. It was just a complete treat. And my goal now is to become MTX's Stargate cybersecurity intern, I think, so I can dive deep into cybersecurity and to learn how these things are how they penetrate into these systems and how they protect these systems. And so what I really need to do is take advantage of Lewis's pentesterlabs.com, because that's, again, another non-affiliated thing. This is just, Lewis has just got this great system of interactive online courses in cybersecurity and hacking and stuff, and I've spoken to him before, and he was very kind, set me up with an account there, and I got to prove my Stargate cybersecurity intern worth, so I figured that might be a good way of doing it, and of course I've got this server to play with as well. So I finished the weekend in fine form. I drove up to visit the hacksmith, the fabulous hacksmith, who was celebrating a birthday and an island warming party. Now, I'd never heard of an island warming party before, because it turns out there's never been an island warming party that I'm aware of, because he just bought an island. This guy just bought a freaking island, and I won't go into details because it's his to sort of reveal to the world as much or as little as he wants. But just had a wonderful time up there, wandering around the property and checking it out, and just seeing all the incredible things he's got going there. I can't wait to go back to Herc Labs, which is his big lab up there, and it really makes me want to go back to Warwickshire and start working on my own rural Canardian research center, along with my tractor and my pig by my side. Pig, come on to the lab. So looking forward to that. The other thing that got me crazy excited was the fact that the hacksmith is an escape room fan. I didn't realize this. Like he's like a fanatic. He's got like something like 70 or 80 of these escape rooms under his belt. And so I was like, okay, we have got to talk about escape room education, because this guy would be brilliant at bringing people in. But of course, he does have a new island to contend with, and of course a massive YouTube channel as well. So maybe I'll give him a bit of a break. But this also reminds me of another event where you will be able to hear myself and James the Hacksmith Hobson talking about some wonderful science and science fiction. Thanks to the folks at Let's Talk Science, wonderful Canadian charity that I will happy and thrilled to help out whenever I can. I will be moderating a panel on science fiction and science on the 29th of February. So I invite you all to join us at that. Go check out Let's Talk Science. Again, links in the email. Let's head back to our email. And we are on to this National Geographic story. I got completely sucked in by this National Geographic story, strangely enough, about these peculiar sneakers that were showing up. But the only problem was these sneakers contained human feet as well. The feet were still attached to these sneakers, and they kept washing ashore in this Salish Sea region and Puget Sound around BC and Washington State there. It became such a thing. It's even got its own Wikipedia page, this Salish Sea Human Feet Wikipedia page, which you can check out. It all begins August 2007. A 12-year-old British Columbian young woman finds a sneaker with a foot still inside. And it didn't stop there, because over the next 12 years, there were 15 similar footwear encased feet found in British Columbia. And then there were like 6 more found in Washington State, Puget Sound. And the Salish Sea is what they call a marginal sea. So it's not really an inland sea, but it's a sea that's connected to the sea, but surrounded by, in this case, British Columbia and Washington State. And these horrific feet that they kept finding started fueling like all sorts of panic and fear and speculation about everything from some kind of like, foot-loving serial killer to some kind of an alien thing happening. But now, thanks to patient and thorough scientific investigation, they have surfaced the just as creepy truth behind these freaky footloose finds, as I put it. And let's go to the website to find the rest of this. So it turns out the bodies decompose differently depending on whether they sink or float. Now, I just assumed that all bodies sank, but it turns out only 69% of bodies sink. And then floating bodies will decompose differently than those that sink. And once a body starts to sink, it just keeps sinking until it hits the bottom. Once they hit the bottom, the bodies can decompose. They can start to float. They float to the surface because they bloat. They sort of bob up to the surface. Horrific. God, I can imagine to see something like that. That's not always the case, though, because if they get into these deep lakes, or in this case, oceans, they may never come up because the deep water is very cold, the pressure is greater, it stops these gases from expanding and then causing the bodies to float back up. And also down in the murky depths, there are a whole other microbial action happening there, which is converting these waterlogged bodies into, it's a lovely description, a waxy soap-like tissue that can survive for years or even centuries in a low oxygen environment like deep, cold water like this. It's called Adipocene, and it's exactly what investigators found on these Salish Sea feet that they found. These bodies had sunk and they'd stayed there for the most part. Now, the Salish Sea, it acts as a trap, like this inland ocean type thing. It acts as a trap, and there's a prevailing westerlies, so it brings in, all sorts of, I guess, seafaring feet from the ocean too. But why feet? Where's the rest of where are the bodies here? How do we, how did they get themselves separated? So what happened was this forensic scientist, Gail Anderson, wanted to figure out how quickly a homicide victim would decompose in the ocean. Now, weirdly, there's the whole thing about throwing dead bodies in the ocean. It's sort of frowned upon by scientific circles. So they use pigs instead, because pigs, as it turns out, are pretty good stand-in for human bodies. They're similar size and biology to us. And so she goes and sinks a pig down 308 feet to the seafloor. And as it turns out, where she did that was incredibly close to the next foot that showed up. That's kind of a weird little coincidence there. They sink a pig, a foot comes up. And then what happened next was best described by her. Anderson says, it was as if a red lobster buffet had risen up to exact its revenge. I'm beautifully put. She should be writing. She should be working on these biology escape rooms. It's a seething mass of shrimp, lobsters, and Dungeness crabs immediately set to work on the pig. And where do they start? Of course, the anus region and the facial orifices. Oh, Lovely little sea critters. But what about the feet? David, the feet, you say. Well, it turns out that these underwater scavengers, they prefer to pick at softer tissues. So unlike these ball and socket joints in our legs and hips and such, our ankles are made of, turns out, yummy soft ligament and connective tissue, just all the sort of things that a Red Lobster special would like. So they can easily pick their way through this part of the body, the body's ankles, and then the feet are then released. And since those feet were generally clad in modern sneakers, they have things like foam soles and lots of air mixed into the fabrics and stuff to make them lovely light and, good tennis shoes or whatever. So they're much lighter, much more buoyant. And so, the Red Lobster special gnaws its way through an ankle and that foot just bobs right up to the surface. And just to make sure, investigators used DNA analysis to try to connect the feet to the missing bodies, not actually literally, but trying to match the DNA, and they found that these were not victims of serial killers or feet stealing aliens. They were, in fact, for the most part, the victims of accidents. So rather sad, and suicides. People flinging themselves in the ocean and stuff because they're so miserable. Which is another reason why government should just be funding research and support for this epidemic of people who are suffering from mental health issues. Just throw that in there. Throw that in the mix there. But I'm really not doing this story justice. You should check out this National Geographic article. It's a fantastic read. Really very, very cool. And what excites me about all this is that it's just talk about a great science, technology, inspiration here. It's got a real wonderful horror element that I think could suck people in. And it's all about the power of forensics and the scientific process to solve the unexplained. And avoid these crazy conspiracy theories and stuff. It's a perfectly nightmarish way of inspiring the next generation of brilliant minds in the forensic department, perhaps. Now, since I had so much fun talking about the horrific science of severed feet, how about some radioactive mutant wolves, huh? Just to finish off this meal of science knowledge. My fabulous son, Sebastian, was regaling me with tales of these cancer-resistant wolves that he'd heard about from this fellow by the name of Dylan Page, who has sort of a science news. He's a science news influencer type thing, and Baz follows him on Instagram. So he's been talking about these mutant wolves to cure cancer, and I was like, wait a second, mutant wolves roaming Chernobyl. I mean, I'm skeptical. I got the usual eye roll when I asked for 3 credible sources. I always ask Baz whenever he tells me a story. I go 3 credible sources, and he rolls his eyes. The poor kid. I can't help it. I've just been taken in by so many great sounding stories in the past, which some of which turned out to be complete nonsense. Great new one, in fact, and I'll tell you about right now, was this story of thousands of these compromised smart toothbrushes that were used to take down websites in Sweden. It turns out it wasn't true, but it was what it was an example of what could happen if people manage to hack vast amounts of these Internet of Things devices, things that are connected to the internet. But it got misunderstood by maybe some poor reporting, and it was announced as the truth when actually it was just a hypothesis of how these things could go. Anyways, the point being is I wanted to find out what was Fang fact and what was feral fiction. And it turns out there's a lot of nonsense out there for sure, but there's also some exciting truths. And it turns out this kid was not far from wrong. So just so you got some backstory, 1986, a reactor explodes at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It released 100,000 pounds of radioactive material in the atmosphere. I remember when this happened. I remember when they said, there's been a weird detection of radioactive material. I mean, it was horrendous, and Russia was very reticent to tell anyone about it. There is an absolutely brilliant HBO series, one of the most brilliant actors, one of my favorite actors, Jared Harris in it, called Chernobyl, and I cannot recommend it enough. I got a link to the trailer in here, which you can have a look at. So this explosion, it sends this radioactive material across Europe, across Russia, USSR. Authorities start evacuating the people there, 110,000 people right after the accident. They created this thing called the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, the CEZ, as I would call it. And originally the zone was 30 kilometers around the reactor for some reason. It was a random decision. They felt that 30 kilometers was enough. It soon expands to become a over 2,600 square kilometer circle that is deemed too toxic for humans. So, yikes. But Humans are out of the picture, so what happens? Nature kicks into overdrive. And this evolutionary biologist, Shane Campbell Staton, says that there is an entire functional ecosystem, everything from amphibians, insects, and birds to megafauna. Megafauna. I love that. I'm assuming megafauna is these things like European bison, boar, apex predators like wolves. Megafauna. So, little aside here. I went looking up this evolutionary biologist, Shane Campbell Staton. And so I Google, and as usual, the first thing that pops up is not necessarily the right thing. There's this Google image of this wonderful, cool, fashionable black guy who I assumed he looked like some kind of a famous musician or a movie star or something. So I'm like, well, that's not my guy. I go digging a little deeper, looking for the real evolutionary biologist Shane guy. Nope, just my racial bias showing, which is it's kind of frustrating for me. I guess in my head I had this image of a kind of I guess probably some nerdy white guy, and so I dismissed the possibility that this cool-looking guy was the quote-unquote real Shane Campbell Stanton. I just, I was just surprised to see him pop up so cool-looking, I guess. And he was this was in fact the evolutionary biologist I was looking for. And I like to think that I've been sort of actively trying to be more aware of my own sort of straight, white, able-bodied male perspective on these things, and aware of my looking for these kind of bias and stuff. And I failed, an epic fail in this regard. Like I didn't really read. I just sort of went like, well, that can't be him, and just kept looking. And it was just such a sign of this sort of systemic, I guess I shouldn't say systemic, certainly my own belief, perhaps based on a lot of systemic bias out there. And at first I was very disappointed in myself. Then you sort of go to the point of failure. You go like, well, that was a failure. And so what did I learn? I learned that I got to look at this stuff better. I got to be more proactive and not be so quick to sort of go with my initial response, and to make sure that I read things properly, and that I look at things from different perspectives. So it was kind of an interesting little conundrum that I got myself into. And I think it's just, I guess, when you think of racists, you think of like, people in white cloaks with burning crosses and stuff. And the reality is it's not. It's not necessarily an active evil. It's a horrible kind of benign system as well, and I was obviously very very aware of it given that search. So, anyways, there you go. It's my little heartfelt apology to myself for that, and I'm going to try very hard not to make those kind of mistakes again. So, humans out of the picture. Wolves are the apex predators, but they're contending not only with their own exposure to this radioactivity, deadly radioactivity, basically. They're also feeding on all these other animals that have been irradiated as well. And those animals have been feeding on irradiated plants. I mean, these things should basically be glowing lumps of cancer. I mean, not really, but that's what you would think, given the fact that these things are at the top of the food chain. Instead, they're thriving. In fact, the wolf population in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, CEZ, is seven times more dense than those in similarly protected areas. So they're doing seven times better than the non-irradiated wolves around. So what's going on? So these mutant superpowered wolves, very popular topic on social media, YouTube, bit of a stretch. Then again, they're not going to be they're not entirely wrong, because the first key to this population explosion is that, well, there's no humans around, right? We're out of the picture. Wolves they can roam wherever they want, unharassed. We humans don't want to be anywhere near this kind of deadly radiation. I mean, unless you're an evolutionary biologist, that is. So Shane Campbell Stanton and Cara Love, a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University, they wanted to know if the radiation from the accident had become a stressor, that's something that could be driving natural selection, like an evolutionary process that's forcing the wolves to evolve in ways that might protect them from this toxic environment. Now, I always thought of evolution as this kind of methodical perfecting process, like a fish gracefully morphing into a monkey as it climbs from sea to land, that kind of thing. Well, Shane set me straight. He's got this amazing TED Talk, and bear with me here because it's going to sound completely like a non sequitur, but this is amazing. In his talk, he talks about the fact that 9 out of 10 elephants in Mozambique were being killed for their tusks. Okay? So there was a mutation in, I'm not sure if it was a number of female elephants, I'm guessing so, but certainly a female elephant has this genetic mutation that meant that she and her offspring did not have tusks, which normally would not be a positive for these poor animals. Suddenly, that is a huge advantage given, humankind's barbaric penchant for making jewelry out of these poor animals, tusks. So the question is, could this Chernobyl radiation be doing the same thing with wolves? Could it be selecting wolves with a particular protection or an immunity to this radioactivity or the cancer that's caused by these things? It was a sort of fascinating look at evolution. The idea that evolution is about animals dying off. Like it's giraffes didn't gracefully get taller and taller necessarily. They just may have had a little bit of extra space, and the other ones died because they couldn't reach the last leaves. It's a brutal process that for some reason I've always felt of was a kind of a more sort of, well, I want to say more scientific process, right? It's not necessarily that things are better. It's just that they're better in the conditions that they've been given. And we've become those conditions. Like, we are a force of evolution. And we suck at it. I mean, we suck at evolution. We're now able to choose our own evolution now. Like, we are not going to evolve in any other way than the way that we want ourselves to at this point, because we've got genetic engineering and gene therapies and all sorts of modifications that we're able to do now. And of course, our ubiquitous influence across this poor planet is forcing nature down all sorts of other evolutionary paths as well, with our radiation, our hunting, deforestation, global warming, mining, dams, pollution, et cetera, et cetera. My God, we totally suck. But okay, evolutionary nerds, let's get back to Chernobyl. So braving this radiation, the fabulous Shane and Kara begin taking blood samples from these wolves, fitting these wolves with dosimeters, which measure the amount of ionizing radiation that they've absorbed. Ionizing radiation seems to be the real the real cause of damage to the body. It knocks around the charges in molecules so they don't bind properly. They bind to things they shouldn't. It can lead to the formation of all sorts of horrific things in the body. One of them was talking about hydrogen peroxide, like literally creating molecules of hydrogen peroxide in your body. It can't be good. This is why this radiation sickness stuff is just so horrible. So they're hoping to discover exactly what kind of sort of mutant magic these Chernobyl wolves might possess. As I said, there's lots of videos and headlines and stuff claiming all sorts of mutant animals roaming around with super mutant powers. And scientists are definitely looking at potential cancer inhibiting genes, but that's not a cure. We're not at a cure yet. They don't even know what the health of the wolves is. I mean, they may be present in larger numbers than was expected, but they may be just, the Walking Dead, basically. I mean, they do appear healthy, apparently, but, the wolf's condition has been equated to cancer patients who've been undergoing radiation sickness. So they could be quite sick. But what is their trick? How are they still roaming around? And Shane says that there may be genetic variation within the wolf population that may allow some individuals to be more resilient or resistant in the face of radiation. So they might get cancer like regular, quote-unquote, regular wolves, but it just might not affect them as much as it would a wolf from outside the exclusion zone. Another key aspect, as Shane says, involves the identifying of regions of the genome that seem to be diverging much faster in Chernobyl wolves than they are in wolves elsewhere. So what they found was that the fastest evolving genome regions within the Chernobyl wolves are in and around the gene that have been known to have some role in cancer immune response or the anti-tumor immune response in mammals. Wow. So basically, these genes are in the right place to be doing some good for these wolves. But now we have to wait because, once again, stupid humans are messing things up with their wars, and this time it's in the form of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Yay. Tell ya, I'd like to sick a few mutant wolves on that megalomaniac jerk. So there you go. There you have it. That is my email of awesome for the week. Thank you so much for joining me. Please do visit techbandits.org to get yourself signed up and check out the goodies that are available over there. Help us out with a Patreon maybe, or a purchase or two of some merchandise would be lovely if you can. There's some fun stuff there. And speaking of Patreon, let's say hello to a few of our Patreons, shall we? All right, so let me thank a few of my fabulous patrons, as I promised. My very non-random randomness here. Gotta thank Captain Catherine. Captain Catherine, thank you very, very much for supporting us. Jessica Ciaublini, who loves this idea and says you can absolutely thank her. But why not plug maybe a link to your favorite Wikipedia page, which I've kind of already done because I just linked to those severed feet, which is just a wonderful Wikipedia page to explore. Thank you very much, Jessica. Huge thanks to Lucky Knight, or Lucas Kosowski. It says his name can be added to the randomizer. Thank you for years of entertainment in Stargate Atlantis. You're welcome, Lucas. Thank you. Tea with Tiffany. I can be added as Tiffany or Tea with Tiffany. I'll do both, shall we? Thank you very, very much. Very much appreciated. So thank you to all of our Patreons. Please make sure you let me know if you are a Patreon. Get over on Patreon and make sure you let me know that I can use your name so I can thank you coming up. And so, without further ado, I shall say, until we geek again, be brave, be kind, and be brilliant. Cheerio, and huzzah. See you soon.